Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? Time for a spoiler-filled episode that will do a deep dive into the latest Hunger Games book, Sunrise on the Reaping. I hope the weather is okay. I'm recording outside. I don't normally do that, but it's nice, it's breezy, and so here we go. This is mostly going to be a reading of the article that I wrote on my Substack that covers all of this deep dive. Sunrise is the second prequel and the fifth overall book in this series since it debuted 17 years ago. With a series like this, it's always fair to ask whether the production merits it. Like, is there a purpose for this book, or is the creator just milking the audience for a few extra bones? Oftentimes, it is the latter. I will defend this one, though. Granted, I'm a bit of a homer for this series, but it has always stood head and shoulders above its peers. And while it did come out at the peak of the YA fiction boom, this series was the rare property that had something more to say beyond, hey, here's an optimistic teenager who defeats jaded adults with the power of friendship or whatever. For my money, this book, Sunrise on the Reaping, was a great installment in a series that has yet to miss. And if you're a longtime viewer of this channel, none of you will be shocked that I feel this way. But why does this book work? What does it have to say that hasn't already been said? We'll take a look at the summary and examine these questions. In the grand scheme of things, this book takes place 40 years after the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and 24 years before the Hunger Games. There are no in-world markers to indicate the year relative to our own. We're never told what year it is. In Mockingjay, we get a glimpse of District 13, and we're told that it was an underground city that was built over the course of centuries. So we're looking at the year 2400 something by our reckoning. However, in world, the only real calendar date we get is all relative to the Hunger Games. In this future, the United States no longer exists. It hasn't for a while. It's been replaced by the nation of Panem, consisting of the capital and 13 districts. The country was constituted as such for a while. Then they had a civil war called the Dark Days. District 13 was kind of the core of the rebellion. They got obliterated, and the Hunger Games were part of the surrender terms. It would be a reminder to never do this again. This is another issue that's touched on in Mockingjay in the third book, but doesn't really get a whole lot of attention in the others. But they are facing a population collapse. With 12 districts and the capital, well, we're never really given a total count of the census, but we are told that the population of District 12 is less than 9,000. They are the smallest district, but even assuming that a much larger district like 11, which is the agricultural district, say it has double or triple that, and then you multiply that by 12 plus the capital, we're still looking at an entire country across North America with fewer than 1 million people in it. And a civil war will definitely eat into those numbers. So you, of course, want to deter it on those grounds, but that wasn't why the capital implemented this system, these recurring games. It was about maintaining their power, which was now threatened. Whoever wins these Hunger Games will get free money and food for life. Each district is forced to send 2 tributes, a boy and a girl, to go into the arena. 24 in, 1 comes out. The current president of Panem is Coriolanus Snow. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes was a prequel about him when he was 18 before he became president. He's president now. Unclear when exactly he assumed that office, but by the time the Hunger Games rolls around, he's still got it, even though he's in his 80s. He's found a way to hold on to power. The trilogy explains all of that. What you need to know for this book is that he's in his 50s now. He's 58 years old, and he's already got a bit of a personal beef with District 12 because of what happened in Ballad. I won't recap all of that here. One of the main merits of this book, from Snow's perspective, is that it shows that he's always had this kind of personal demon out in 12. It started when he was 18, it got worse in his 50s with Haymitch, and by the time his 80s rolled around, Katniss and Peeta were kind of the final straw. It wasn't like he just up and decided to hate 12. From a very young age, he was always suspicious of them, and they've haunted him. And we see that Haymitch played a role in fortifying that animosity that Snow had towards them. So that is all the setting. let's get into the summary of this actual book. And I will try to be a little bit brief with this. I'm going to skip over some details so that when you read it, there's more for you to discover than just what I've told you here. We drop in on District 12. Our focal character is Haymitch Abernathy. Readers of the trilogy will already know that he wins this year, and when the Hunger Games rolls around, he's the world-weary mentor for District 12, constantly drowning his sorrows in alcohol. For now, he's a healthy teen in a poor family, celebrating his 16th birthday, which unfortunately lands on Reaping Day. Going back real quick to the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, that's when we first learned that Reaping Day is on July 4th. So whatever distance there was between the United States of America and Panem, that date at least retained some significance, so much so that they put the Reaping Day on it. During the events of Catching Fire, Katniss and Peeta watched recorded footage of the 50th Hunger Games, so the reader already has an idea of what happens. Haymitch does get reaped, he enters the games, he has a brief alliance, and then he wins by attrition. What Katniss and Peeta didn't know is that what they saw was a lie. We find out in this book that Haymitch's name didn't get drawn in the beginning. The boy who did end up getting drawn tried to flee, and the cops shot him in the head. A riot broke out as a result. Haymitch got in the middle of it, and as punishment, he was selected to replace the dead boy. And the managers faked drawing his name for a recorded broadcast. From there, his fate was sealed. What follows is, for the most part, a rather conventional process for the games. Haymitch and his fellow tributes hop a train to the capital, where they learn some basics about combat and arena survival. We meet several familiar faces from elsewhere in the series, more on that in a minute, and learn to navigate the complex landscape of players, like the careers from District 1 and 2. A significant scene in this phase of the story is an unexpected meeting between Haymitch and President Snow. During the parade where the tributes are presented to the capital, Haymitch's chariot crashes and his fellow tribute, Luella, dies. Haymitch makes a scene by carrying her dead body directly to Snow. Luella was only 13 and she was important to Haymitch, and so losing her was one of several emotional impacts that he took early on in this process. Later, when Snow meets Haymitch in private, he threatens him, and he finds out about his girlfriend back in 12. Being on Snow's personal radar is not a safe place, so now Haymitch has a target on his back. But he is not without allies. Long before Katniss Everdeen ever entered the arena, a loose cabal of rebels was already at work behind the scenes, trying to sabotage the games however they could. After learning this, Haymitch becomes part of a conspiracy to destroy the arena before the games can end, taking away the capital's most potent psychological weapon against the districts. Haymitch is only moderately successful, and failing here is even more dangerous for him. He more or less wins the way that Katniss and Peeta saw in the footage later, but the reader learns that this footage was manipulated. Nobody in Panem saw anything that he did to sabotage the arena. He's declared the victor, only to return home and find his house in flames with his mom and brother trapped inside. As a final dagger to the heart, he meets up with his girlfriend just as she ingests poison, thinking it was candy, and she dies in his arms. Poison, as you'll know, is the trademark weapon of President Snow. It's how he has stayed in power for so long. Haymitch's losses are greater than he can bear, and from there he becomes the alcoholic that we know from the trilogy when he's in his 40s. His challenge was amplified by the fact that his birthday is always on Reaping Day, and in the drunken haze that becomes his baseline, he always hears the ghost of his little brother saying, "Happy birthday, Haymitch," whenever Reaping Day comes around. For 24 years, he watched more and more kids enter the arena, only to die until Katniss and Peeta came along for the 74th. So that's the summary of this book. Let's talk a little bit more about why it matters and what it adds to this series. Haymitch is a fantastic main character. He's a rascal. He's a survivor, up to a point. He's a young man fueled by his passion to love, to his family, and his loyalty to his friends. Watching him break in slow motion is a painful process, but in a story where you already know the ending, learning the other steps can be illuminating. In a lot of ways, he's like Katniss. He wasn't actually reaped, But by bringing him in, the games introduced an instrument of their own downfall. Without him, Katniss wouldn't have been as effective later on. He's a crucial part of that puzzle, and seeing how he became who he was is a rewarding process. His little brother Sid could easily have been a clone of Prim, but he stands on his own 2 feet. Like Katniss, Haymitch lost his dad to the mines, and his mom makes her living as a laundress. We get regular references to his deceased grandmother, named in the Appalachian fashion as Mamaw. I won't lie, this tied me to Haymitch even more whenever he mentioned her. My family is from coal country, West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio. My dad's mom is my Mamaw. So that one hit home. Another key character is Haymitch's girlfriend, Lenore Dove. She's from the same subset of people as Lucy Gray Baird, who was the female lead of Ballad. The Covey were a group of traveling minstrels who eventually settled in District 12, and they had their own customs. Lucy Gray was once the object of Coriolanus Snow's affections, and she escaped once she knew he was a murderer. The fact that he never caught her ghost, quote unquote, is one of Snow's most challenging secrets. When Snow finds out that Haymitch has a Covey girlfriend, it stirs up more than just a piece of practical animosity. Snow rapidly becomes invested in Haymitch's downfall, and Lenore Dove becomes a piece in his strategy. We also meet several familiar faces before they grow into their more solidified versions from later on. Beetee and Wiress have a role to play. They're both victors, though Beetee is a known subversive, and as punishment for hacking the Capitol's TV systems, they reaped his son for the Quarter Quell. Wiress is coming off a victory in the 49th Games. She's the most recent victor. She is assigned to mentor District 12, as they haven't had a victor since Lucy Gray, and nobody is allowed to talk about her. So Haymitch gets some mentoring from Wiress, and also from Mags, the elderly woman from District 4. Although at this point, she's not yet in her 80s, and she hasn't completely lost the ability to speak. Finnick Odair hasn't been born yet. So, let's see, how old would she be? We get her in her mid-50s or so. Her warmth and compassion are very helpful to Haymitch as he mourns the death of Luella. And it's great to see Mags at her full capacity before she starts to degrade like she did in Catching Fire. Then there's Plutarch Heavensbee, who became head game maker in Catching Fire, but in here he's just a lower-level employee in the games. However, he is already affiliated with the Rebellion, and he's able to help Haymitch and Beetee coordinate their efforts to sabotage the arena. He has a crucial conversation with Haymitch during his victory tour, one which clarifies Haymitch's ties to the rebels later on, and why he was able to trust Plutarch. One of my favorite appearances, though, which, this got an actual verbal outburst from me as I was listening to the audiobook at work, was when Effie Trinket entered the story. It's established in the Hunger Games that stylists almost never care about District 12 and they never put any effort into making their tributes look good. But we see that firsthand here with 12's handlers. There's a woman named Drusilla Sickle and her husband Magno Stift. They're the fashionistas, but they don't care about 12. They don't care about doing their jobs. And they kind of phone it in, leaving the tributes to fend for themselves for their interviews with Caesar Flickerman. But that's when somebody calls in an audible to their clutch cousin who has been hoarding old, dated, but stylish clothes from the family, brings him in to slap something together really quick and makes it work, and that's Effie. She's able to wring pearls from coal, inside joke, and makes the tributes look great in a way that felt authentic to their character. Finally, for the most devoted fans of the overall series, getting to meet Katniss's parents and learn their names was a special treat. Burdick Everdeen is a hunter from the Seam, and Astrid March works in the apothecary in town. They're sweet on each other, and while we never meet the Mellark boy who likes Astrid, we do meet his father, Otho Mellark, who runs the bakery. Greasy Say also has a few cameos at the Hob. All of these appearances felt right for the story, and not just egregious. I appreciated that. It's the right way to offer up fan service to the devoted reader, and still focus on the higher goal of telling the story right. One big question that readers have had, and fans like me, is whether current day politics were going to make an appearance in the story. Collins has been consistent in her standard with these books, namely that they are about power, tyranny, rights, and peace, without putting cheap and dated stand-ins for any current day politician. However, there is a point I wanted to note from the two prequels, both of which came out during the culture wars of the 2020s. None of the content in the trilogy ever touched on issues of race or sexuality, which is great. Going into those regions would have watered down the real focus and merit of the books. In the 10 years between Mockingjay and Ballad, mainstream publishers took on a more proactive role in propagandizing these issues, demanding they be crowbarred into every story possible. In Ballad, there was a brief mention of a man who owned a music club in the capital, and he was romantically linked to a male musician who performed there. It was only once, a fleeting thing, and the subject never came up again. Something similar happened in Sunrise on the Reaping, early in the first chapter, where Haymitch mentioned two men in a relationship in 12 who had to keep it on the down low. There was an awkward line from Haymitch, and this book is first person, like the trilogy, that didn't match his tone or voice at all. It was a soapbox departure about how he supports all people who love differently. None of that matched the way that he spoke for the rest of the book or at any other point in the series. In both of these instances, the insert was awkward. It had no bearing on anything else in the story, and it was never mentioned again. For a series that makes regular use of setups and payoffs, the random injection of a zero-impact gay character felt more like a demand from the editor and less like something that the actual creator intended for the saga. With all of the exposure in the last few months from the Department of Government Efficiency, it wouldn't surprise me to know that mainstream publishers were getting federal funds for diversity initiatives, and thus required the insertion of these elements into everything that they put. This explanation is much more fitting, especially considering the here and gone nature of these mentions. But overall, nothing else like this made it into the story. And again, Collins did a great job of keeping any kind of current dayism, any United States partisanism, if that's a word, out of it. These books are about what they are about, and she keeps it that way. As for the content, the violence in the arena in this book is on par with anything else that has been presented in this series. You've got bladed weapons and blunt instruments, poison, blood, so on. There was, however, one particular death that I found more than a little upsetting, and I think it was meant to be so, obviously. There is a decapitation near the end of the games, and you can understand how it adds to Haymitch's lifelong distress at the center of this narrative, the horrible things that he's seen and the trauma that they inflict on him. But that's it. There's no, additional debauchery or profanity or anything. She's kept them tonally consistent across 5 books now. So now we get to the big question. What does this book add that was not already established in 4 previous installments? I will admit that when I was at about the 2/3 mark, I was asking myself this question. Why write this book? What does it say that hasn't already been said by Ballad or by the trilogy? We know what the games are, why they are wicked, and that totalitarianism is bad. However, Haymitch has a few observations that didn't make it into the other volumes. A key one being that he doesn't understand what the games are supposed to accomplish if they're meant to punish the districts for rebelling. The rebellion ended 50 years ago. None of the kids or their parents were even alive for it. So do the games work as intended? Or is the fact that there's still a rebellion prove that this whole thing is pointless? Even more so, this is a story about how the truth is manipulated to fit a narrative, and that was never more clear than when Haymitch saw the official footage of his games after the fact. Entire sequences were shown out of order. Tributes died at the wrong time, and there was never any mention of his failed attempt to blow up the key infrastructure of the arena, even though he had the means and carried out that part of his mission. Makes me think of, I don't think it was Pulitzer. I think it was William Randolph Hearst in his famous quote to his photographers, "You provide the pictures and I'll provide the war." Images and video can be heavily manipulated to get people to believe something that is not true. And that is something that we should all be wary of. Finally, Sunrise on the Reaping is a story about endurance, persistence, and patience in the fight against tyranny. Haymitch failed and wanted to give up, but Plutarch pulled him aside to talk about it. He takes him to the attic of the Justice Building in District 11, where an adult Haymitch would later take Katniss and Peeta in catching fire, because it's one of the few places where they know there isn't any surveillance. When Haymitch chides Plutarch for thinking that he's heroic and that the Capitol can be beaten, Plutarch admits, in plain terms, "I'm nobody's idea of a hero, but at least I'm still in the game." It would be another 25 years before Haymitch and Plutarch and the rebels succeeded in helping Katniss and Peeta destroy the arena, upending the games as they had intended during Haymitch's quell. Persistence. It is the devil's only virtue, and if you want to beat him, you've got to match it. Final note on fan service. This is a question that comes up every time a late sequel arrives in a franchise. And I think it's fair to ask, we live in an age of saturated IPs and cash grabs, most of which only dilute the legacy of greater artistic creations. On the plus side, this book was composed by the original author and in the spirit of the same philosophical exploration that led to the trilogy. The reader treads familiar ground in District 12, the Capitol, the Training Center, the Arena, and the Victory Tour, but all of this is in service of the higher questions of good versus evil and persistence in the fight. So in the end, why should you read it? I will say that I had the same third act hesitancy with Sunrise that I had with Ballad, wondering where she was taking me and how it was going to end. The conclusion of Ballad gave us a look at the birth of a tyrant, a man who had the choice between love and power, and chose power, setting off to kill his way to the top. Ballad did leave a few too many pieces of that puzzle to the imagination, linking 18-year-old Snow with his 83-year-old version, but seeing him in his late 50s in Sunrise gave us some closure that I didn't know I was looking for. While Sunrise is the first book about a subject where we already know the ending, it's a bridge novel that makes the entire series more complete and more robust for existing. The epilogue was a particular treat, fast-forwarding Haymitch into his 20s, 30s, and 40s, watching as Burdick brought his daughter around to the Hob, then mentoring her in the 74th and 75th games. When the war was finally over, he helped Katniss and Peeta with their Book of Remembrance, and he was finally able to recall the names of people he had loved and lost, going all the way back to his stint in the games. In conclusion, if you're hesitant about a fifth book in a well-established series, don't be. And I hope that this recap has given you enough to still look forward to if you haven't read it on your own. You people and your spoilers. You can grab a copy of it with my affiliate link down in the description. I'll get a small commission for that. And also check out my Cracker Stack. That's where I do kind of longer form reviews of books, and I analyze the writing in TV shows and movies. I'm just out here trying to find great stuff and make great stuff and share it with the world. So give this one a look-see. It made my best of 2025 list, much to my delight. Till next time, drive safe. See you out there.